The Black Dahlia Murder, the mystery unfolds. Introduction. The year was 1947, and Los Angeles was a city on the cusp of change. World War II had ended, and the city was booming with newfound prosperity. But beneath the glamour of Hollywood and the promise of the American dream, a dark undercurrent of crime and corruption festered. Amidst this backdrop, one of the most gruesome and enduring mysteries of the 20th century unfolded. The murder of Elizabeth Short, a young woman who would become forever known as the Black Dahlia. Her story is one of unfulfilled dreams and tragic ends, a tale that has fascinated and horrified the public for over 7 decades. Elizabeth Short was just 22 years old when her life was brutally cut short. She had come to Hollywood with dreams of becoming a star, but instead, she became the center of a macabre spectacle. Her murder was not just another crime, it was a statement, a grotesque performance that would haunt the city and the nation. This video essay delves into the mystery of the Black Dahlia, exploring the details of the crime, the life of Elizabeth Short, the investigation that followed, and the enduring theories that have kept this case alive in the public consciousness. As we unravel this mystery, we will see how a young woman's life became intertwined with the dark side of Hollywood, and how her death became an unsolved puzzle that still captivates and chills those who dare to investigate. The discovery of the body. On the chilly morning of January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles was just beginning to stir when a horrific discovery was made in a vacant lot in Limert Park, a quiet residential neighborhood. Betty Bersinger, a local housewife, was walking with her young daughter when she noticed something peculiar lying in the grass. At first, she thought it might be a discarded mannequin, but as she drew closer, the horrifying truth became clear. The body of a young woman, severed in two at the waist, lay splayed out in the open, her bloodless skin stark against the earth. The woman was Elizabeth Short, though she was not immediately identified. Her body had been meticulously posed, with her arms raised above her head, elbows bent, and her legs spread apart. The scene was grotesque, and it was clear that whoever had done this had taken their time. Elizabeth's face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears in a gruesome smile, known as the Glasgow smile. Her body bore signs of torture. She had been bound, beaten, and mutilated before she was killed. Her intestines were tucked neatly beneath her buttocks, and her body had been drained of blood, leaving her pale and lifeless. The brutality of the crime shocked even the most seasoned detectives of the LAPD. Lieutenant Jesse Haskins, one of the first officers on the scene, later remarked that the sight was something he would never forget. The case was immediately treated as a high-priority homicide, and the investigation kicked into high gear. But as the days went on, it became clear that this would not be an ordinary murder investigation. The public was horrified and fascinated in equal measure, and the media soon descended on the case, dubbing the victim the Black Dahlia, a nickname that would become infamous. The name Black Dahlia was likely inspired by the 1946 film The Blue Dahlia, a noir thriller about a murder that had captivated audiences the previous year. The press, eager for sensational stories, quickly latched onto this nickname, adding an element of dark glamour to the case. The gruesome details of Elizabeth Short's death were splashed across the front pages of newspapers across the country, and the Black Dahlia became a household name. But while the public and the press were fixated on the macabre aspects of the case, the police were facing an investigation that seemed almost insurmountable. The crime scene had been contaminated by curious onlookers and reporters. Crucial evidence was mishandled or lost, and the sheer brutality of the murder suggested that the killer was both calculating and deranged. Despite the LAPD's best efforts, the investigation quickly stalled, and the Black Dahlia case began its slow descent into the annals of unsolved mysteries. Part 2. Elizabeth Short's life. Elizabeth Short's life was one of dreams deferred and opportunities missed. Born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, Elizabeth was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her early life was marked by tragedy, when her father, Cleo, abandoned the family in 1930, leaving Phoebe to raise the girls on her own. The Great Depression was in full swing, and life was hard, but Elizabeth found solace in the movies. She dreamed of becoming a Hollywood starlet, a dream that would eventually lead her to the City of Angels, and to her death. Elizabeth was a strikingly beautiful young woman, with jet black hair, porcelain skin, and striking blue eyes. She had an air of mystery about her, a quality that both attracted and repelled people. But beneath her glamorous exterior, Elizabeth was a vulnerable young woman who longed for stability and love. Her life was a series of transient relationships, brief romances, and fleeting opportunities. She moved frequently, living in various cities across the country, including Miami, Boston, and Santa Barbara, always chasing her Hollywood dream, but never quite reaching it. In 1943, Elizabeth moved to Los Angeles, hoping to find work in the film industry. But like many young women who flocked to Hollywood in search of fame, she found it difficult to break into the industry. Instead, she took on various odd jobs to make ends meet, working as a waitress and living in cheap hotels and boarding houses. Despite her struggles, Elizabeth maintained her dream of becoming an actress, even as her circumstances became increasingly dire. Elizabeth's personal life was also marked by instability. She was engaged to a young airman, Lieutenant Gordon Fickling, but the relationship ended when he was deployed overseas. She later became involved with another serviceman, Major Matt Gordon, who promised to marry her after the war. But in August 1945, Elizabeth received the devastating news that Major Gordon had been killed in a plane crash in India. The loss was a crushing blow for Elizabeth, who had pinned her hopes for a better future on their relationship. In the months leading up to her death, Elizabeth's life became increasingly precarious. She was often seen in the company of men, some of whom were connected to the seedy underbelly of Hollywood. She struggled to find steady work and was reportedly living in poverty, relying on the kindness of strangers for food and shelter. Her last known address was the Cecil Hotel, a notorious downtown Los Angeles hotel that had become a haven for drifters and criminals. It was there that Elizabeth spent her final days, before disappearing on January 9, 1947. Elizabeth's disappearance was not immediately reported, and it wasn't until her body was discovered 6 days later that the full horror of her fate became known. As the investigation unfolded, the police began to piece together the last days of Elizabeth Short's life, but the trail quickly went cold. The men she had been seen with were questioned, but none of them could provide any useful information. Elizabeth's movements in the days leading up to her death remained a mystery, and the lack of concrete leads only added to the frustration of the investigators. Part 3. The Investigation. The investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder was one of the largest in LAPD history, involving hundreds of officers and countless hours of work. But despite the massive effort, the case was plagued by missteps and missed opportunities. From the beginning, the LAPD faced significant challenges, not least of which was the overwhelming media attention that turned the investigation into a public spectacle. The press played a significant role in shaping the public perception of the case. Newspapers were eager for any details, and the sensationalist coverage often blurred the lines between fact and fiction. Reporters speculated wildly about Elizabeth's life, portraying her as everything from a glamorous starlet to a tragic victim of Hollywood's dark side. The police, under intense pressure to solve the case, were often forced to navigate a minefield of misinformation and public scrutiny. The investigation was also hampered by a lack of physical evidence. The crime scene had been contaminated by onlookers, and much of the potential evidence had been compromised or lost. The LAPD scoured the city for clues, but the killer had been meticulous, leaving little behind. The brutality of the crime suggested that the killer had a deep-seated rage, and the precision with which the body had been mutilated led some investigators to believe that the murderer had medical training. But despite these theories, the police were unable to identify a clear suspect. As the investigation dragged on, the LAPD received hundreds of tips and confessions, most of which led nowhere. Many of the confessions were from attention seekers or individuals with mental health issues, and none of them provided any credible evidence. The police also interviewed dozens of suspects, ranging from Elizabeth's acquaintances to known criminals, but each lead ended in a dead end. One of the more intriguing leads came from a series of anonymous letters sent to the police and the press. These letters, written in a taunting tone, claimed responsibility for the murder and included personal details about Elizabeth that had not been made public. The letters were signed the Black Dahlia Avenger, and they seemed to suggest that the killer was someone who had a deep knowledge of the case. However, the letters provided no concrete leads, and their authenticity was never confirmed. The lack of progress in the investigation led to growing frustration within the LAPD, and the case eventually began to slip into the realm of cold cases. But the public's fascination with the Black Dahlia remained strong, and the case continued to capture the imagination of the nation. Theories about the identity of the killer abounded, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish, but none of them provided a definitive answer. Part 4. The Key Suspects. Over the years, numerous suspects have been proposed in the Black Dahlia case, but none have been definitively linked to the murder. Among the most prominent suspects is Dr. George Hodel, a Los Angeles physician with a dark and troubled history. Hodel became a suspect in the early 1950s after his name was linked to several other unsolved murders in the area, and his connection to the Black Dahlia case was later solidified by his own son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective. Steve Hodel has written extensively about his belief that his father was the Black Dahlia killer, presenting evidence that he claims links George Hodel to the crime. This evidence includes a photograph that Steve Hodel believes is of Elizabeth Short, as well as cryptic entries in George Hodel's personal journals that seem to reference the murder. In addition, George Hodel's medical background would have given him the knowledge and skill needed to carry out the precise mutilations found on Elizabeth's body. However, despite the compelling nature of Steve Hodel's claims, there is no conclusive evidence that links George Hodel to the Black Dahlia murder. The LAPD has never formally charged him with the crime, and many investigators remain skeptical of the theory. Other suspects, including known criminals and individuals connected to the Hollywood underworld, have also been investigated, but none have been definitively proven to be the killer. Another prominent suspect is Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and former mortician's assistant who was briefly considered by the LAPD in the late 1940s. Dillon had knowledge of the case that seemed suspicious, and he provided details about the crime that were not publicly known. However, he was eventually cleared of suspicion after the LAPD determined that his confession was likely fabricated. Other suspects include Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner who was one of the last people known to have seen Elizabeth alive, and Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived near the site where Elizabeth's body was found. Both men had connections to the case, but neither was ever charged with the crime. The lack of a clear suspect has led to countless theories about the identity of the Black Dahlia killer, ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. Some believe that the murder was the work of a serial killer, while others suggest that Elizabeth's death was part of a larger conspiracy involving the Hollywood elite. But despite the numerous theories, the true identity of the killer remains a mystery. Conclusion: the Black Dahlia murder is a case that has fascinated and horrified the public for over 7 decades. It is a story of a young woman whose dreams of stardom were cut short by a brutal and senseless act of violence. But it is also a story of a city and a time, a moment in history when the dark side of Hollywood was exposed in the most gruesome way possible. The case remains unsolved, and the mystery of Elizabeth Short's death continues to captivate those who seek to unravel its secrets. Theories about the identity of the killer abound, but none have provided a definitive answer. As time passes, the chances of solving the case grow slimmer, but the legacy of the Black Dahlia endures. Elizabeth Short's story is a reminder of the fragility of life and the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of our most cherished dreams. It is a story that continues to haunt Los Angeles, a city that has never quite shaken the shadow of the Black Dahlia. And it is a story that reminds us that some mysteries may never be solved, but they will continue to captivate our imaginations, even as they remain shrouded in darkness.